Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks again for joining us in the latest event in the Newcastle Develop series, which this month is on the charitable or third sector, and I assume we might get into the argument about charity or third sector at some point. These events are a chance for alumni in those sectors to come back and give their experience, their knowledge, their expertise back to our student and alumni communities for those who are either starting off in those sectors or who are thinking about getting a job within the charity sector as well. A few pieces of housekeeping from me before we begin. All attendees have their videos and microphones off. Please keep them off for the event so that we can keep the recording on the panelists themselves. If you do have any questions, there is the Q&A function across the bottom of your Zoom panel. You can ask open questions there and they'll either be answered by a panelist typing, or we'll try and incorporate them into the meeting itself. You can also ask a question in all chats should you so desire, but it might not be picked up quite as quickly as the Q&A session. If you do have any problems or issues, please feel free to send me a message through the chat. And apart from that, I hope you have a really enjoyable time and find this very informative. And now I'm going to pass over to our director, who is in the middle of my screen, Paul Tyack. He has 18 years worth of experience in major gift fundraising and senior leadership in the charity and higher education sectors. He has a strong skill set based on understanding and responding to the needs of internal and external stakeholders. And he has a real passion and enthusiasm for the charity sector, which I'm sure will come across. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Paul.
Jeremy, thank you very much, and thank you to you, of course, for organising this and many other events for Newcastle alumni. It's a real pleasure to be hosting this event. Welcome to you all, and welcome to people who will listen into this on the recording. As Jeremy said, the charity sector has been part of my working life really since I was a student. I was a student at York University. I was a music student along with one of the other panel members, and my career started with volunteering and then a placement with an internship at a charity and grew from there. It's a fantastic sector to work in. You're going to forgive the growling that's going on underneath me. It's the dogs taking offence. I find this a fantastic sector to work in. It's a rewarding career, both in terms of the impact that you make and also the people you meet, and just an opportunity to really make a difference in the world. So I'm really pleased to see people who've joined this call and the panel members to join me in speaking a little bit about this profession. And answering your questions and hopefully inspiring a few people to think more about a career in the charity or the voluntary sector. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel members, and I'm just going to ask them all a question at the start, which is, what was it that first drew you to working in the charity sector? So Jewel, I'm going to introduce you first for the benefits of our guests. Jewel is a MA in Creative Writing from Newcastle, and she's the Marketing and Communications Manager for the voluntary organisations network North East. Jewel, what is it that first drew you to working in the charity sector?
Initially, it was probably, getting experience at uni, kind of volunteering. I've kind of always enjoyed that for purely selfish reasons. Kind of trying new things, all that sort of stuff. So when I was at uni, I really immersed myself in campus life, and each opportunity led to another, basically, and it just sort of snowballed from there. So I know in terms of just who I am as a person that the voluntary sector suits me, and I think I found that out even more when I worked elsewhere outside the sector, because it took me a very long time to actually get into the sector proper. I worked in corporate organisations for a very long time. I kept on landing jobs in those purely because, that's ended up being what happened, and they weren't me. It really was a little bit soul destroying, frankly. Whereas I can guarantee that the current team I work with, it's the most capable and committed people I've ever worked with in my life, and I think that is pretty much everybody's experience working in the sector, I think.
Joel, that's just fantastic to hear. So your role is marketing and communications manager. Just in a nutshell, what does that involve?
Well, Vaughan's a little bit unusual in the sense that we are a charity in our own right, but we are also a charity that supports other charities. So we're a membership organisation for any charity and voluntary sector organisation or social enterprise, any not-for-profit essentially that operates within the North East or has a beneficiary kind of remit within the North East. So there's also organisations that are national, such as Changing Lives, that are members of Vaughan. My role is really varied. Basically, I do all of the communications and marketing for everything that we're involved in. And that includes work currently on digital inclusion, the North East Climate Coalition, which is climate action and climate change. There's so much. We publicise events. We post job adverts on behalf of other sector organisations. And all that sort of stuff. So it's a really varied role, and it's a really meaty role.
Joel, thank you. And Laura, welcome. It's wonderful for you to join us, and thank you. So Laura has a BA in Politics and Social Policy and is Executive Director of External Affairs for Changing Lives, which is a well-known national charity. But you've come to this from a different career path via, I think you were a probation officer before you joined this sector. So Laura, what is it that first drew you to Changing Lives or to the voluntary sector?
Yeah, it was different. I trained to be a probation officer, which I really loved for a few years. But my last job in probation was working with a lovely title, Prolific and Priority Offenders in Newcastle, which meant a small number of people committing most of the crime in the city. And quite a few of them were women, which is quite unusual. And I just got really interested in their lives, really, and thinking about the fact that I felt we weren't meeting their needs because most people in the criminal justice system are male. It was a really ignored group. And I managed to get a secondment, set up a service from it was paid for by the Home Office just for 6 months. And I needed a charity to kind of hold me to do some sort of really exploratory work for women. And Changing Lives, we were at that point called Tyneside Cyrenians, we were much smaller then. They were happy to have me. And so I joined the charity sector then and never went back, basically. I think it was the commitment of the people around me, the fact that there was so much innovation, so much passion for what we're doing. And if I'm really honest, I think I loved the fact that I could be much, much freer. I wasn't working for I wasn't sort of a part of the state in a public service, which comes with it, rightly so, but a lot of statutory requirements, and it's quite much more rigid in how it operates. And when I joined Changing Lives, I felt I could really, really meet the needs of the people in front of me. I could really work with people in the right way. I could innovate. I could develop services. So I think that kind of freedom to do what I felt was the right thing to do just appealed to me so much that I never looked back, really.
Laura, thank you. It's truly inspiring. You have a fantastic job title, which is Executive Director of External Affairs. Tell us what that means and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I'm fairly new to that, probably about 2.5 years in that, because before I developed and led our women's services for Changing Lives. So I come from a very operational service background, but increasingly I became really interested in the fact that we can support people, but actually if we're not trying to influence and change sort of the system around them and really strive for social justice, people can be stuck in a cycle and stuck in their situation. I felt it was really important as by this stage, we were quite a large charity, working with thousands of people every year, that we were really making sure we were raising their voice, listening to the reality of life. I think so much policy is made it sort of in a vacuum, and people don't really, they're quite far away from the people that policy actually impacts. So I kind of gradually evolved into this role, which for me is really directly just about raising the voice of the people we work with and making sure those people making decisions, whether that be local government, national government, you know, or whatever sphere really, listening to them and understanding the reality of life for the people we work with.
Laura, thank you very much, and we'll want to hear much more about this, I'm sure. Thomas, welcome to you. I think you're vying between yourself and Jewel as to who's closest to Newcastle University at the moment. We might take that offline afterwards. But Thomas, you graduated with an MA in British History, and you are you let me know on the call before that your job title has changed literally today to Funding Manager for Citizens Advice Northumberland. So Thomas, our sincere congratulations to you. It makes a difference having the job title manager. It must feel good and you deserve it. So Thomas, what drew you to the voluntary sector for your career?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I did. I graduated back in 2009. And what really drew me to the sector was I'd actually been in the third sector on a voluntary capacity since the age of 11. So that was at Beamish Museum, which is an open air museum in the northeast of England. So I joined the engagement force at the age of 11 until 16. And I then went into paid employment with them from 16 up until the point where I graduated in 2019. And at that point, I really felt that although my passions were obviously in history, that was something I wanted to pursue a bit further. So I actually wanted to look at the community and think, actually, I want to do a bit more. So I kind of was interested in looking at how I can meet the needs of local communities and how I can actually address some of the unmet need that I was kind of coming faced with on a day-to-day basis. So I went to work for a local hospice, worked in the field of income generation and community engagement. That was at Willoughburn in Durham. Great place to work. It was fabulous. But then again, I still felt that personally for me, there was a lot of people who I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis who had issues with fuel and food poverty, who had social issues. And I felt that actually I wanted to work for an organisation who was really driving that forward, and also in the kind of funding landscape to utilise my skills, which were kind of really in the field of data analysis, writing and research. So obviously I then moved to Citizens Advice, and it really did, I know there's a question for the panel later on, but it really was that case of what kind of was it value to me at heart, and that was definitely the community and people making sure that they were getting the services that they wanted and the support that they needed when they needed it most. So that's really what drew me to the sector, and I think it is that idea of having the community at heart, kind of what Laura and Jewel both said. It is very much about the community, as opposed to about kind of meeting statutory requirements or meeting kind of public sector agreements. That's very much to do with the community, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. So that's definitely what drew me in.
Thomas, thank you. And I like your CV because you actually have an exact mirror of my career, which I also started my job role as a grant writer for the children's charity Bernardes, and that grew into being a funding manager, or words to that effect, for a similar charity. So Thomas, tell us a little bit more about what funding manager means and what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically within the day-to-day role, I manage all of the funding for the organisation. So that's both the core funding elements. So that's from people like Northumberland County Council, National Citizens Advice. We'll have contracts with the British Gas Energy Trust, Energy Redress, the Money and Pension Service. So that's the core kind of element to the role. And I also manage all of the kind of projects that go on alongside that. So as part of my job, I am the funding and bidding lead for the Cancer VCSE Network North East. And also I'm the lead for the Thriving Communities Network in Northumberland. It's a network that brings the VCSE together. Really what I'm kind of looking at is the sustainability of the organisation, ensuring that because we're quite a small organisation in comparison to Changing Lives and Vaughan, making sure that we actually are driving forward and making sure that we are kind of present across the county, and making sure that we are kind of there for the people who need us most moving forward. So it's ensuring that the money's coming in and also looking at that kind of innovation and how we can do things a bit different into the future. So that's kind of the main kind of crux of the kind of job role. Aside from that, obviously also deal with all of the corporate partnerships and things like legacy fundraising. So it's a very diverse role, but it's very exciting.
Thomas, thank you. And to everybody again, forgive the dog. She is missing her mother. On this call in particular, we can forgive this. Her mother, my partner, is the chief exec of Age UK in Doncaster, and she has a board meeting this evening, so hence that I have a rather unruly dog on my hands. Thomas, thank you for giving that overview. Again, we'll probably come back to fundraising as a career path, because I think it might be something people on the call are interested in. Andrew, welcome to you. I think you're probably furthest away from Newcastle at the moment. I've planted myself on the Tyne Bridge. I think you're in leafy Surrey at the moment, but a very warm welcome back to virtual Newcastle to you. Andrew, I'm actually going to ask you to speak a little bit about your career and your various roles, because you have quite a few, and I don't think I would do justice. So, Andrew, could you talk us through what the ways that you're involved in the sector?
Sure. Yeah, no, I've got to say I'm really excited to be here as well, because I loved my time in Newcastle. So I studied music. I was the other music student on the panel. So yeah, so I now run a hospital charity in Surrey and Sussex. So for 3 busy hospitals, and it's a so I'm responsible for all the fundraising and charitable spending and what we do. And we're a small charity, but we've got some big partnerships. So for example, with the national charity partner for Santander Consumer Finance, we're Gatwick Airport's main charity partner, which is quite fun. Prior to this, I ran one of the biggest hospital charities in the country. So I ran the charity for Guy's and St Thomas's hospitals in London, with a team of about 31 fundraisers, which again was quite a lot of fun, and spent 6 years at a place called the King's Fund, which is a health think tank, effectively, where I looked after a corporate partnership program there, building partnerships with people like Pfizer, Philips, GE, and others. I was fortunate to work at Macmillan. So I've worked at Macmillan Cancer Support, where I led a team of national sort of corporate fundraising account managers, and we looked after all the sponsors for the world's biggest coffee morning, which is their sort of flagship fundraising event. I've been fortunate to be a trustee of a charity. So from 2012 until last October, when I reached the end of my term, I was a trustee and then the chair of trustees for the Huntington's Disease Association, which is a national charity providing care, support and information for families affected by that disease. But it all started really from volunteering, doing admin for the Prince's Trust on Team Valley Trading Estate. So part of the reason I'm excited to be here is that I know that people do kind of wonder how to get into these interesting jobs in the charity sector. And I'm sure we've all had quite different routes into it. But for me personally, I'm just a massive advocate for, first of all, working in the sector, but also volunteering for an organization that you care about. So the reason I volunteered for the Prince's Trust in the beginning was that I was unemployed because there was a recession on, and I was a recruitment consultant, and I needed to find something interesting to do while I was looking for a job. And through sort of volunteering, I discovered that there were all these interesting sort of paid roles that you could do in the charity sector. And thanks to a sort of a nice reference from the fundraising manager at the Prince's Trust, Alma, who I owe an enormous amount to, I discovered this whole other career. But it all started through volunteering, mostly for something interesting to do in Team Valley Trading Estate.
Andrew, thank you. And you preempted exactly where I was going to take this discussion, which was, let's have a conversation about first steps, because I think a number of people who are listening into this might be thinking, what are the first steps I can take? And one of the things I find about the voluntary sector is we do call it a sector, and we think of it as a kind of single group of types of organisation, but it is quite extraordinarily diverse. There's a diversity just on the people on this call, but actually we're only reaching a tiny proportion, because we can add to this the international charities, the childcare charities, the medical research charities, you name it, and the list would go on and on. You'd also find that there were charities that, to all intents and purposes, actually look like semi-public service institutions. Universities might fall into that. Universities are charities. So when we're thinking about the charity sector, let's remember about universities and schools and hospitals. So the sheer range of opportunities is enormous and potentially a little bit bewildering. So let's think about those first steps. And Jewel, I'd like to come back to you because you have a connection point with lots of charities doing lots of different things. What are the things that you see and you would encourage as first steps towards a career in the charity sector?
I'd say the main thing is to be really open-minded, because as you've touched upon, it is incredibly varied. The range of roles you can have is absolutely huge. And I think one problem that people come out of universities occasionally and have is that they've been encouraged throughout their school career and occasionally throughout their university career to start closing doors for themselves and to be like, oh, specialise, specialise, specialise. I've actively avoided that my entire career, and it's been the right thing for me because I've continually added new strings to my bow and been somebody who sort of sucks up any opportunity I can to sort of skill up sideways rather than upskill. I'm constantly skilling sideways, and it means that I've never been out of work, but I've also done a huge variety of jobs. So even when I was in corporates, I shaped my job around everything that organization was doing in terms of social enterprise activity and corporate social responsibility. So as well as volunteering to be involved in those things because it helped keep me sane in an atmosphere that just wasn't right for me, I actually started to specialize the PR elements of my role around those things, because frankly, my colleagues saw it as the fluffy stuff and didn't want to do it, whereas I knew I was making a difference by doing those things. And at the time I worked for a retail bank. So you can get involved in the charities sector without even having a job with a charity per se. So I would say always be really open-minded and keep your feelers out for opportunities and never sort of close yourself off by saying, oh, no, but I don't do that. I only want to work in XYZ, because your career is a very long one. I'm 41 and I'm currently in sort of my third career, I suppose, for want of a better word. But everything I'm doing now, I'm touching upon stuff that I was doing when I was at university and in my first kind of couple of years. So everything's a stepping stone, absolutely everything.
Jewel, thank you. And I think that kind of spread your wings is a really important message, actually. I'll give a personal reflection. I was absolutely convinced I wanted to work for an international charity. Sounded very glamorous. And that was my career path. And of course, as probably everybody on this call has experienced, you need to take a few knocks before you find yourself actually doing something that's right for you. And I wouldn't have imagined myself working for a children's charity as my first job. But of course, that kind of being open-minded, perhaps actually open-minded to the cause you work for, is advice that's useful to listen to. I'm going to ask a question, again, first steps of a career. How does volunteering play into this? Because obviously we call this the voluntary sector. We all know that volunteers play a part of it, but actually we're all fortunate to have paid jobs within this sector. How do you develop a portfolio of volunteering that could potentially lead to a paid job in this sector? And I'll actually open that to all of you to think, would somebody like to talk about the link between volunteering and the career? Andrew.
So I'll have a first go, but then feel free to chip in, everybody else. So, I mean, my route into the sector was via volunteering. So I'm a massive advocate for it. And the thing I would say is volunteer for something that you are genuinely interested in. Because for me, that's one of the joys of working in this sector is, I think, building on what Jewel was saying as well. It's a privilege really to be able to do a job where you can go to work, earn a salary, and be doing something that you genuinely care about. And I'm sure that'll come through talking to all of us about our respective jobs. But so in terms of volunteering, first of all, yes, it can be a wonderful way of demonstrating that alongside your transferable skills from another sector, you could be a good candidate for a paid job in this. So in my case, I worked as a recruitment consultant. So I was effectively doing a sales job prior to realizing that I could use very similar skills in fundraising. But But then as you move through your career, there's all sorts of other volunteering opportunities. So I know that a number of us on the call have been trustees of charities, and that's something that, again, you do as a volunteer. And there are opportunities for people to volunteer as trustees relatively early in their career. And again, we spoke about this on a sort of pre-call for this. There's some incredible sort of opportunities to volunteer as a trustee and build your experience that then could help you with roles outside of the charity sector as well. So yeah, I think volunteering can play a role throughout. And just one other thing to say is, you know, although charities employ people, in a lot of cases, a lot of them are very dependent on voluntary support as well. You know, whether it's kind of supporters or donors or people actually delivering services on a voluntary basis. Yeah, volunteers kind of feed into the sector in every level.
Yeah, I'll reiterate everything you just said. I was a trustee quite late on, but I really wish that I had discovered being a trustee earlier, because I think it has fast-tracked sort of some of my development, which is not the reason I went into it at all. I went into it purely because it was another interesting opportunity. It wasn't me taking a busman's holiday. It was in a charity within the learning disabilities area, which is something I have no personal or professional experience of previously. So while they wanted me for my expertise in terms of comms and marketing, I was there to be involved in something completely and utterly different, which was great. And actually, there was a Young Trustees movement. So I would everybody on the call, I would Google the Young Trustees movement. There's also trustees positions being advertised on the VON website every day. And I would definitely seek that out, because you develop so quickly and so much, and you're genuinely helping to run a charity. That's what being a trustee is. It's so valuable.
Joel, thank you. And while we give you a moment to take a breath, do put the link to VON's website in the chat so people can look at that. I'm just going to really quickly say what a charity trustee is, actually, because it's one of those jargon phrases we sometimes take a little bit for granted. A charity trustee is the equivalent of a board member for a commercial organisation. They're almost always unpaid roles. There are occasions when they're paid, but they're almost always unpaid. And it's the group of people who take on the legal responsibility for the organisation. And as Jewel and Andrew have said, it really is a fascinating way of gaining an insight into the sector. Organisations look for young trustees, and some of the big funding organisations like the Arts Councils very, very explicitly encourage boards to go away from the traditional types of board member that you might get to in an organisation, and they're wanting to see that range of ages, backgrounds, experiences, diversity. So I'd really encourage that as well. Thomas, do you have any reflections on the role of volunteering in connecting into paid work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is sometimes I know from my background to doing a history degree, I was very much, when I left university, people were saying, well, what on earth are you going to do with a history degree? You can only really go into education, or you can only go into kind of roles down the kind of stream of law, which was to me, very much something I never wanted to do. I had sometimes looked into education, but I felt that wasn't for me. So for me, it was the transferable skills. And I think actually, if took a bit of time, obviously, I mean, I do love the current job that I'm in, but I took a bit of time to do a little bit of volunteering post-graduation, looking at the kind of roles that you can do. Like what you say, Jewel, obviously she does marketing and comms. You can do a range of things. It could be admin, it could be trustee. I know when I went to kind of organisation, we do research and campaigns, which is very attractive to kind of young graduates or people who are in studying. So I think if I had just kind of got my feelers out a little bit more, it's quite a good way to make sure you actually like the job role, rather than just jumping into a paid job and then getting there and thinking, well, actually, I don't like this. And just off of that, the Young Trustee movement, I will absolutely vouch for it. I'm not a trustee, unfortunately, at the moment. I am looking to do it in the future. But my organisation has 2 young trustees, and they're absolutely fabulous. And we actively do promote them. So I think if anyone is interested in doing something like that, please do go on somewhere like VON and look at the vacancies up there, because I think it is an amazing opportunity for the younger generation.
Thomas, thank you. Laura, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, if I may, because you took a slightly different path to this, in that you developed a professional career, in your case in probation. And actually, if you look at the charity sector, the other panel members have found a route via kind of there building up professional skill sets within the sector, but you transferred, call it for want of a better word, from a professional skill set in probation into the charity sector. And I know that the same will be the case for youth workers, people perhaps working in conservation, art galleries, where there is a need for a professional skill set. Do you have any advice for people who might be thinking about a route into the not-for-profit sector via a particular professional career?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, to say, before I was a probation officer, I volunteered. I started off volunteering in homeless charities, and then I did work in the sector for a short period of time. And I think it's, I mean, I really wanted to work with people, and it's hard, you know, the people we work with at Changing Lives have gone through some really difficult times. We work a lot with addiction and homelessness and domestic abuse and sex exploitation, and it's pretty hard to just land a job like that. I think you need to know that it's right for you, and I think that volunteering route, whatever set you're going into, in that way, is really important. And to reiterate what everyone else says about the sort of trusteeship, I'm really keen. I think it's really important that we have a kind of lens that's cross-sector, though. And I remember fairly early on in my career, I went on some training which was with private sector and public sector and voluntary sector, and I found it completely changed my outlook, really. And I think having that understanding of how the different parts work, for me in my role, I find completely invaluable, because it's really understanding where other people are coming from. And the charity sector is complex, in that often the people we're there to support are not the people sort of giving us the money, and there's so many different relationships, and it's quite, it can be political, it's endlessly fascinating, but there's so many different relationships and dynamics within that I think having at least some understanding of different sectors is great. I'd really encourage it. Obviously I would hope then people come to the voluntary sector because it's such a rewarding career, but I think having a cross-sector lens is really important.
Laura, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question for everybody, and then we're going to need to roll our sleeves up and get into the questions from the audience. So I'd like to ask, probably, if I could ask Andrew first, what do you look for when you're recruiting for someone at an entry level or perhaps a mid-career level in the voluntary sector? What are the things that stand out to you?
So I guess it obviously depends on the nature of the job, but a recent example actually of a role where we've recruited to a fundraising job is that we ended up hiring someone with no fundraising experience at all, but really kind of demonstrable, transferable skills and loads of evidence of them just kind of making stuff happen, and thinking kind of creatively and in a really organized way about how to make stuff happen. So yeah, I guess a point I was thinking about before, which does kind of link to your question, is that I remember the feeling of being sort of just out of university and thinking, am I completely sort of set on a career direction here? Is it too late to change direction? Because I think a bit like Jules said, and certainly Laura as well, with having sort of had quite different careers. I think I'm on my third career as well, having been a musician for a couple of years, and worked then as in telesales for a bit that led into recruitment, and sort of I remember that feeling of sort of, is it too late to switch? Have I found my thing yet, or what? But it isn't. Certainly, sort of whatever stage you're at, I think, whether you're sort of just a year out of university or you're sort of 10 years out of university, as I was, there are opportunities to move into the sector. So I think my view on it is get as good as you can at whatever it is that you're doing, and well, I come back to sort of volunteering, or in your free time, kind of building your kind of experience in a sector that you're really interested in. So yeah, but it doesn't necessarily matter that you've not worked in the charity sector before.
Andrew, thank you. And I'm going to stick in my mind that I agree completely. People who get stuff done. That's a really nice phrase. And getting stuff done, actually, wherever that may be, is something that the voluntary sector is very good at applying itself to problems. So if you're the type of person who, perhaps as a student or in your life outside of your work, you simply get stuff done, be that sports, be it in the arts, you might find that you have the sort of skill set that the charity sector is looking for. Okay, I'm going to move us into the questions. And to everybody on this call and those listening on the video, thank you, because I think this is the richest set of questions I've seen on one of these events so far. So wish us luck. I'm going to try and group them together. So I have a group of questions which are related to how do you start gaining exposure and contacts and knowledge about this field? So the questions I'll ask are, what strategies would you recommend for gaining exposure and contacts? Do you have any tips for about how to feel a little bit less intimidated about making yourself known and your voice heard in networking meetings? And do you have any advice on where to find knowledge, sort of reading material about careers in this sector? So something about how do you build your networks, something about how do you feel less intimidated and build up your confidence in that, and what source of reading might you give? So can I just simply throw that open to people?
For me, one way I think to get exposure and kind of just start to learn about the sector is to get involved in conversations on social media, or just to start with, just monitor conversations on social media. Have a look at different hashtags, like, for example, Charity Tuesday, things like that, and just start to build relationships quite, naturally. So I wouldn't say, I think sometimes networking can seem really forced. You go on to, obviously after today, anybody on the call is more than welcome to LinkedIn with me, and drop me a direct message if they've got any sort of follow-up questions or anything like that, absolutely. But that can feel, like you say, quite intimidating. So if you just build it up in a natural way for yourself, kind of, when you're, I suppose, protected from a face-to-face networking, then that's a really good way of understanding where conversations are at and seeing what trends are happening, and literally building relationships with people, because there's always somebody at the other end of the keyboard, you know what I mean? In terms of the intimidation thing, I've always struggled with that myself, to be fair. It's I'm a natural introvert in an industry, comms, that is incredibly extrovert, so I do struggle with that. And so one way could be to, do your own sort of blog, or even an Instagram account or something like that. I know I'm kind of bringing it all back to comms, but that's my natural, but do it about the subject matter that you're passionate about. So if you're passionate about homelessness, or you're passionate about climate change, or you're passionate about, digital poverty, anything, just start to experience that subject. And talk about it in a digital fashion first, and then you'll gain the knowledge, you'll gain the experience to be able to then bring that to face-to-face interactions.
Cool, thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I think, what Jill's saying is really true, in that the charity sector is so diverse. It's really hard to sort of say, oh, there's one route, this is how to do it. You could be working with a huge charity which is really delivering government contracts. You could be thinking about a really small grassroots charity which is embedded in a community, whether that be of place or of people, but really, very close to the people that they're working with, and everything in between. But I think what's common to all charities really is a very clear sense of purpose of why we're here. And so if you decide, I think for me, it was all about what I was interested, what the cause really. Because as we've said so many times, there's so many different causes that you could be interested in, and once you have that, I think then it will start to emerge for you. So I think really thinking about actually what is the purpose is vital.
Laura, thank you. Thomas and Andrew, would you like to add anything on the networking, and also building your confidence in that. And the final part was any advice for we work for a university, so let's call it a reading list for people interested in working in charities. Thomas.
Yeah, I think for me personally, one of the things that actually really helps in terms of the networking side of things, networking coming straight out of university can feel really intimidating because you're young and people think that you maybe don't have the experience or the knowledge that they have, which is very true in the majority of cases. So one thing I kind of learned to do, now it might not be the best thing, so don't kind of hold us to this, is to look beyond job titles, because often what used to freak me out is I would go and talk to someone that would say, I don't know, I'm an executive of this, or I'm a CEO of this organization, and that used to actually worry me a bit, used to make us think, oh gosh, I can't possibly talk to you because I'm not that experienced. So I think what helped with me is actually looking at the organization, a bit like kind of what Laura was saying, look at actually what that organization does, look at kind of what their purpose is, how do you align with that, really does help, and that really built my confidence, whereas now I can walk into a room and I feel quite confident to talk to anyone. Before, when I used to look at the job titles and panic before a meeting, I kind of got rid of that, and it actually really helped me. In terms of that other bit about kind of finding information and kind of knowledge about the sector, for me it was LinkedIn, like Jewel kind of referred to before. I'm not that active on it. You can search as you want. But yeah, it was just a case of using that as a network to understand what kind of vacancies are out there, because there's quite a few going on from the third sector. What do other people do? And just connecting up and kind of just asking simple questions. Can I ask kind of how you got into that sector? What kind of things do you do on a daily basis? And it kind of just builds that knowledge and awareness of the sector a bit more. So I think that really helped from my perspective in that way.
Thomas, thank you. I'm just going to add one thing before I forget it. It's worth following the recruitment agencies. I won't list them out, but if you are on LinkedIn, you'll find them very easily. But looking at the charity recruitment agencies and the types of jobs that are available, start getting used to the type of lingo that's used. So I think that would be my tip on reading lists, would be to follow the recruitment agencies. Andrew.
Yeah, so just to build on kind of what people have said already, I think I always come back to just finding something that you're really interested in. You know, so as Laura said, you know, her kind of career sort of developed almost by accident from the sound of it, but by following a thing that you were really interested in and wanted to help with, and that's led to such interesting kind of roles. And I guess a similar thing has happened to me as well. So so I got involved with the Huntington's Disease Association, which I ended up being chair of sort of a few years later, initially because we had a family connection to Huntington's. And I think initially I ran a half marathon to raise some money for them, which was great. But then I read a story. There was a story of a man called Charles Sabine in The Economist magazine. And he's a guy who was a war reporter for, I think, NBC. And there's videos of him on YouTube of him reporting from Iraq and car bombs going off behind him and stuff. But he was talking about how his family have got Huntington's disease in the family, and what he was trying to do to raise awareness of the disease. And this kind of really struck a chord with me. Because he was speaking about how, you know, facing Huntington's was kind of more scary than when he'd been, you know, held against his will with people holding a grenade next to his head, for example. So I sent an email to the Huntington's Disease Association saying, you know, did they know this guy and could I do anything to help? And within 6 months, I was sat next to him helping to launch an all-party parliamentary group for Huntington's disease in Westminster, which I would have never seen coming. But it all came from following something that I was personally really interested in, and actually sort of taking the time to send an email to the charity. And that I didn't, you know, that could have easily led to nothing, but it didn't. It led to this kind of really interesting route. And I'm sure we've probably all had similar sort of moments in different versions where you sort of you create your own luck in certain ways, or you can create opportunities to follow a direction that you're interested in at the very least.
Andrew, thank you. I totally echo it. Do follow the, you know, find and follow, and I'm sure that all of us would find there are 2 or 3 people in our careers who just provided that little light bulb moment or encouragement. So really good advice. Okay, I'm going to move us on to a next and even more challenging set of questions. So I hope you're ready. And I am slightly looking at the clock, so let's try to whistle through these ones. So this is a little bit more about career progression. So how do you progress your career in the sector? Let's just take that big question. The second question is, how do you move from profit making to the not-for-profit sector, and perhaps even vice versa? And the third question on this is, what are the salaries like? And I think that's a really fair question. I think it's one that perhaps charities need to be, perhaps it's good to be confident about and say, yes, we get paid. So, so the first question is about career progression. How do you grow your career? The second question, transferring between different sectors. And the third question is, what's your advice and experience about the pay? So let's start. Jewel, again, do you mind if we start with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I'd say progressing in the sector is, I would say, done in a very similar way. Starting in the sector, kind of be open-minded to opportunities, don't close yourself off. And I suppose develop really solid relationships within your organization or within your network so that you become aware of opportunities to progress, and that could be upwards or sideways. Like I say, I think don't always look at progression in one direction. With regards pay, I mean, we're we follow the sort of public sector salary guidelines, so we're a show the salary provider and all that. So anybody who advertises a job via the VON website, for example, they have to show the salary, because it's one of those things where the charity sector historically, I think, is seen as very, very low salaries, but actually I'm not finding that's the case. And I've come from, areas like software development consultancies and commercial retail banks, and my salary is not far off what I was on for a higher level role, really. So I'm perfectly happy with my salary, and I think the salary ranges are getting more competitive, because it is a really competitive area, VCSE. There's lots and lots of really capable people that you don't want to lose as an employer. You want to grab hold of those skills and keep them in the sector. So it makes sense for charities to begin to be more competitive with their salaries.
Cool, thank you. And it's good to hear you say that. Others, do you want to come in on this? Laura.
I will. I think for me, I mean, I think, Jill's right around being open-minded, but I think in the sector, if you want a job where you sort of come into work and you tick the boxes, you know exactly what tasks you're going to do, tick the boxes and you go home, it's probably not the right sector for you, because it's so diverse, there's such a sort of purpose behind it. You'll find yourself being slightly kind of jack of all trades, I think, whatever you're doing. And that's what makes it really exciting and innovative. So, I started off, delivering frontline services, and I'm now oversee our policy and communications teams. I have literally zero expertise in a sort of professional capacity in those things, but having just worked in it for years, I do have experience, and that counts for something. And I think people's lived experience is really important. So for me, it's around having a sort of mindset around leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm not talking about hierarchical leadership, but being responsible and being innovative and making decisions, whatever role you're doing, is really important in the sector. But I think probably for most of us, that's why it's such an exciting sector to be in, because you're not sort of told exactly what your day job is, come in, do it, go home. It's always so much more than that.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any reflections on the salary question?
I think it's probably not the best sector, and it's not the worst. I think it gets a really poor press with it. I think generally, I think, you start off probably similar to in the private sector where you start off. And I think, I think it's absolutely fine. I don't think most people go in it just for financial reward, because they get so much more out of it. But it's certainly not the case that you go into the sector going, oh, well, I really want to do this, but what a shame, I'm going to lose out. Not at all.
Laura, thank you. And again, a reassuring voice. Andrew.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said already. in terms of your progression in your career, if you're in the sector, I think the size of the organisation makes a big difference. So, so somewhere like Macmillan, for example, where I was fortunate to work, obviously people can move around, but often if you're in a very large charity, you might find yourself moving up within a particular stream. So, for example, within fundraising, whereas if you work for a much smaller charity, you can have the opportunity to work across a much broader range of stuff. And then, as Laura said, you can find yourself sort of doing almost an entirely different job from day to day. And there's something to be said about both of those, about just being conscious about whether you are in a large organization and you are specializing and moving up a route that you're interested in, or you're deliberately in a smaller place and getting a much broader range of experience that might help you later on. So there's something to be said for both of those. Just on salaries, so it does, it's really interesting that, I mean, for me, it was so eye-opening to realize you could get paid in the charity sector and do interesting, meaningful work. And I think that still comes as a surprise to some people outside of the sector. But of course, a charity has to be run properly, as any business would have to be. I've been fortunate that I've sort of come through the fundraising side of things. So on that side of things, it's really transparent whether you are good value for money for an organization, because you need to basically raise many multiples of what you cost, and then life's good. And if you're not doing that, it's sort of fairly transparent. But I would agree, as a sector, it is possible to earn a good salary and do very meaningful work as well, which I think counts for almost as much.
Andrew, thank you. And Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to come in, and obviously I'm quite new into my career, so this is quite prominent. In terms of career progression for me, I was actually, it's really good to hear what Andrew said earlier about kind of employing someone who didn't have much experience, because that's how I originally got into fundraising. I had no experience, and the person who was interviewing me just seen potential and said, actually, you've got the skills and the ambition and passion to kind of really drive this forward. So that was really good for me in terms of seeing that potential. And I would say to anyone, don't just look at a job role and think, oh, I've not got all of the skills. If you've got some of them, you could still be offered that opportunity. And I think it could really springboard you, as it has with me. In terms of progression, obviously internally, I started off as a fundraising bid writer until today, and then I worked up to that kind of managerial title. But again, it's the same kind of job role. And again, it's seeing that potential of personal development where you actually want to go in the future. And like Laura was saying, don't look at leadership as a hierarchical thing. Look at it as a kind of a personal goal. Kind of look at it as an inward kind of move. Are you kind of the right person to move forward, and can you move forward? So yeah, I think I would definitely vouch for that. And in terms of salaries, just to pick up on that question, I have a lot of friends who work in the private and public sector, and I'm on very much equal levels of pay to them. So yes, as someone who's kind of a recent graduate, the pay is good. Like Andrew says, especially the funding world, it can be more of a challenge if you have to raise certain amounts in comparison to your salary and things. But what's life without a challenge? So it does have its rewards.
Thomas, thank you. And I'd just like to share my own thoughts on this with the guests as well, that I think that the chances are you're probably not going into a career like this for the money. However, the terms and the conditions of charities are comparable in many ways with other sectors, and the salaries are good in comparison with some other sectors. It's hugely variable. It's a massive sector, and it will go everywhere from a huge range. But I wouldn't see it as a barrier to entering the sector. Okay, so we have time for a final quick fire round of questions. If you did ask a question and we haven't asked it yet, we're going to have a go at it now. So I'm just simply going to go round the table with quick fire questions to you all. So quick fire question and a quick fire answer. And I would like to start with Jewel. What's your view on the future of the sector after the pandemic?
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's going to be challenging because a lot of the emergency funding pots have, that's kind of, you can tell that they're coming to an end because, for example, our click-through rates on our most recent funding information bulletin have gone through the roof. So we know that there's now a need from the sector in the Northeast, at least, to seek out new funding pots, but there is funding available. And one thing that has been clear in the pandemic over the course of the last sort of 16, 17 months is how innovative and creative and collaborative the sector is. There's really vibrant times ahead. There's so much more good stuff that will come about as well as the challenging stuff because of the pandemic. So collaborating with cross-sector, I mean, NICO, for example, which is one of the sort of offshoot organisations that Vonnie's a member of, is a cross-sector organisation that is fighting for climate change, for example. So that's just one example where the private sector has worked with the third sector and public sector for a particular cause. Similarly, we're one of 17 local organisations that is written to Rishi Sunak to try and campaign and lobby him to reverse the decision on universal credit, the £20 cut. And again, that's been we're members of the Chamber of Commerce and they're members of us. So it's about breaking down the silos, I think, is the main thing. And that's really started to happen. So I'm really excited, actually. I think there's lots of good stuff to happen.
Good, Jill, thank you. Okay, super quick fire question. I'm going to fire it to Andrew. Do you think people need to work in London, or can they build a successful career in the north?
Yeah, you can build a successful career anywhere in the country in in the charity sector. Yeah, yeah. You know, undoubtedly there are a lot of head offices in London, but there are also big charities based all over the country. You know, I mean, for example, I mean, at the moment I work in a hospital charity. There are hospital charities at every possible corner of the country, and that's just one sector.
Andrew, thank you. And Laura and Thomas, I've run the clock down. So I'm just going to invite Thomas. Is there any final advice you would like to give?
No, I just think kind of go into it kind of with a positive attitude, be optimistic, and I think you will get a rewarding career out of it. I think absolutely COVID showed that it can be challenging, and it was challenging beforehand. But like Jules says, the opportunities there now, collaborate, and it is moving forward. We are kind of an innovative sector, so yeah.
Okay, right. Thomas, thank you. And Laura, any final comments from you?
Just, I think, be really aware of the diversity of the sector, but also be really aware we are really wanting young people and young people's perspectives within the sector, and a very diverse workforce. So it's really very open at the moment. And hopefully.
Wonderful. So panelists, a very deep thank you on behalf of Newcastle and our alumni community. The final message I will give to everybody on the call, those of you who are still relatively recent graduates, you can contact the Careers Service for advice about your careers. You'll also please do feel free to contact Jeremy or me about this sector in particular. I'm sure both of us will be willing to have a chat with you. So thank you very much, panelists. Thank you for everyone who's joined this call. It's been a joy to host it.